In the late 1800s, the Elk River region of West Virginia was the heart of a massive timber boom. The landscape here is characterized by steep, densely forested ridges and deep valleys, severely isolating the logging camps that operated within them. The men who logged this terrain were known as woodhicks. They worked grueling 12-hour shifts felling massive hardwood trees, like oaks and chestnuts, using only cross-cut saws and axes. Their days were defined by constant peril. A snapping branch or a rolling log could easily cause fatal injuries, and the physical exhaustion of swinging an axe on a rain-slicked 40-degree incline was relentless. When night fell, the crews retreated to cramped log cabins to recover from the cold. The stories shared in these bunkhouses were tall tales, narratives built on a foundation of blatant, conscious exaggeration. This practice of yarning, trying to outlie the guy in the next bunk, served a highly practical purpose. It allowed the loggers to push back against a wilderness that constantly threatened to crush them. By taking the very things that made their lives miserable and exaggerating them to a ridiculous degree, the workers stripped those threats of their power. They turned fear into a punchline. The ultimate product of this one-upsmanship was Tony Beaver. He was a giant, superhuman woodsman who supposedly ran a camp up the mythical Eel River. Tony was an invincible avatar, conjured by vulnerable men to survive a punishing world. The first target for these stories was the environment itself. West Virginia is incredibly wet, and the dense fog that rolls through the hollows can bring a logging operation to a standstill. In Tony Beaver's camp, the men didn't wait for the weather to clear. They took their cross-cut saws to the ridgeline, sliced the thick fog into chunks, and packed those chunks into barrels with salt to use for shade during the blistering summer. When a weeks-long rainstorm threatened to wash away the timber, Tony grabbed a 100-yard coil of rope. He lassoed the primary storm cloud right out of the sky, tied it to a hickory tree, and held it there until the sun finally broke through. These fictions gave the woodhicks a way to laugh at the rain and the cold. They reduced uncontrollable atmospheric conditions into physical objects that could be sawed, salted, or tied up. The land itself received the exact same treatment. Navigating the sheer drops and unpredictable currents of the Appalachian Mountains required constant vigilance. So the loggers told the story of Tony's giant grindstone. When the delivery men dropped it, the stone rolled down a mountain, flattened an entire valley, and splashed into the Elk River with such force that it created a permanent island. During a severe flood on the Eel River, Tony ordered his men to dump tons of shelled peanuts and barrels of molasses into the rushing water. He stirred it all together with a massive tree, damming the river and inventing peanut brittle. By attributing the local geography to the absurd accidents of a giant lumberjack, the loggers mentally shrunk the terrifying scale of the mountains down to a manageable, comical size. As the timber industry grew, a new threat emerged. Eastern businessmen and railroad speculators began arriving in the mountains. These tycoons held the capital and the contracts. They viewed the land as a resource to extract, and the local laborers as uneducated obstacles to be managed. Tony Beaver became the loggers' defense against this condescension. When a slick city engineer with charts and calculations arrived to tell Tony he was running his logs all wrong, Tony simply picked the man up and set him on a far riverbank. When a railroad tycoon tried to cheat the camp with a contract buried in fine print, Tony pretended he couldn't read it. He dipped a wooden fence post into a barrel of ink and stamped "paid in full" across the entire document. These particular tales offered a satisfying fantasy. They proved that practical, working-class mountain wit could easily outmaneuver elite city money. Eventually, the logging camps modernized. Steam-powered machines replaced the handsaws, the bunkhouses emptied out, and the oral tradition of Tony Beaver began to fade. He likely would have disappeared completely if not for Margaret Prescott Montague, a West Virginia author who grew up hearing these bunkhouse yarns. She collected them and published a book called Up Eel River in 1928. Montague's preservation highlights a stark contrast between Tony Beaver and the lumberjack he is most often compared to, Paul Bunyan. While Paul Bunyan started in the oral tradition, he was adopted by the Red River Lumber Company in 1916. He became a national advertising mascot, used to sell everything from timber to mufflers. Tony Beaver escaped that fate. Without corporate sponsorship, he remained fiercely regional. He is an authentic, homegrown secret shared among people who understand the specific geography of the mountain state. By compiling the Eel River legends into a permanent record, Montague prevented the mountain state's specific identity from being smoothed over by more generic, nationalized versions of the woodsman. The loggers of the Elk River faced freezing rain, deadly timber, and exploitative bosses. They fought back with clouds salted in barrels and rivers dammed with peanut brittle. When faced with impossible odds, their greatest act of survival was creating an impossible story.